So this is the main screen you kind of encounter. Here's all the past projects I've been working on, things that I'm working with, and what's going on. This is the old CTW. So we're going to do a new project. So when we do a new project, it just gives us a blank space. In this case, it doesn't ask us to save a name. It doesn't ask us anything about the format. It doesn't want to know how many, when you open Photoshop, it immediately goes into what size do you want, what kind of file you're working on, how many pixels per whatever. In After Effects, it doesn't worry about that until you have something worth saving, which is kind of interesting. But basically, you have the two options of new composition or new composition from footage. The thing is, you have to work in a composition. That is the space that a thing happens in. Any animation happens within a composition. You can think of compositions like a frame, like a folder. Okay, so like if any video I want to put together, I can put all of it in this folder and it'll stay nice and sorted, and then I can export that and that will become a video. Okay, so we'll start with a new composition, and the things that it's going to ask us are the name. I'm just going to call this test. I don't know what else I would call it, unless somebody tells you otherwise. Go with 1920 by 1080. That is just a standard television size. If you're looking to do what a laptop is, if you're trying to recreate a laptop, 1920 by 1280, right? So those are just common numbers that you can look up on the interwebs. But basically, this is kind of where you'll usually stick within those confines, okay? Time code, so it starts at 0, that's fine, leave that. And then how long is it? This is gonna be 10 minutes long. It's just set up to be whatever length. We can change this, I'll make it 5. I doubt I'm gonna go that long. My initial frame rate is 29.97 or 30. Some say to use 24. This is the one I found when I was looking online and I've had most success with. 24 works just fine, but basically frames per second. So what that means is like your iPhone films at 24 frames per second, or different cameras film at different or want different outputs. Those two are kind of standard in America and you can get away with them, but you want to try avoid jumping if you can. But I've never had issues. Of all the research I did online, this is the frame size that was most recommended, so I went with that. You're going to find that a lot. The things that I tell you are the things that I found success with, okay? Doesn't mean it's the only answer or the right answer, and rarely is it the only answer, and rarely, no, it'll be the right answer for what we're doing, I guess. That we can say. But basically, there is no correct way to do it. So look into it if it really bugs you and you really want to know more about it. But for now, we're just going to go with 29.97. Okay. Now that I've created this space, and I will note that if you watch the video, my space is a little backwards. They have their time frame bar on the bottom. I have mine on the top because I like the way this is laid out. It's exactly the same. All those panels are still right here. Info, audio effects, preview, align, all the stuff they talked about is there. All your actual files will show up here. So here's my test composition. Eluded me for a second, couldn't remember the name. I am working currently in that composition up here. You can see at the top, this folder right here is telling me that's what I'm working in. This down here is telling me what I'm seeing in my sample. It's black because nothing's in it. And it's also black because I chose it to be. You can make the background any color and it won't affect it. Similar to the crosshatches in the other. Sometimes I'll make my background bright white so that I can see where the holes are in things, because you'll see a bright white spot through it. That's terribly annoying to look at. So often I'll start with black. But if you come in, you can go into the settings and you can just click on the actual background color and it'll change it to whatever it is. That does not mean it'll always export it that way. That just means that's what you're working in when it's saying there's nothing in the background, okay? If you save it as a movie file without saving the alpha space, saving the alpha space is something that we're gonna learn basically is the video equivalent of a PNG file. If you save it with an alpha space, you'll get negative space where there is the background color. If you save it as just a regular video without saving that alpha space, without adding it to it as an RGB video or whatever you're saving it as, it will treat that background as black, similar to the way a PNG would treat, a JPEG would treat the background as white when it saved it, and it just fills in that gap for you, okay? So it's not gonna add anything, but it's gonna add that color so that it's something in the back because there's just nothing there, okay?
I got a question, Max.
Go ahead.
So would you end up changing the width and height if you're working like on a bigger canvas, like if you're projecting on a wall versus like a computer screen or a laptop screen?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So for Pippin was on 4 television screens, right? What I did was I figured out what each television's natural pixel was, what its setup was, because they were 72 inch. It was a larger number. But basically I got the manual off of it, or just went in and looked at it and then looked up the manual and figured that out. And so then I laid that out vertically. And then I figured out the actual math of how much space was between them, because if I just laid one video on top, if somebody, there's a moment where somebody walks through, and if it walks off one screen and instantly appears on the other screen, it's not going to look like a person walking by. So I included that negative space and I saved it as a mask. So basically in my computer, there were three black bars that everything would animate behind, so that I could see what it would look like on the TVs. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So in that case, my file size was the height of the TV times 4 in the width, as well as with, so literally the videos, if you remember, I can show. 1 second. Pippin. Let me share this video real quick. So this video that we watched with the volume, right? So basically each one of those is 1280 or 1080. Sorry, it is 1080 by 1920 tall. And then there's mathematically whatever the space is in between them in just black. It's just a layer of black, and then opening, and then black, and then open. And basically I measured it out so that when the character or a magic thing whooshes by, it looks realistic, that we're not, see how the map, if the second it came off of one, it appeared on the other, that would feel wrong. So having that negative space, if you just treat it as one video size, it would be. So when I set up the video content for this, I literally just did the math and figured out how wide it had to be. And when you export it, you can see the video, like it will naturally scale at that size, because that's just what that video is. Cool?
Yes.
Awesome. Back to After Effects. Nope, that's desktop. Cool. So yeah, let's drop some stuff in. So I'm going to just add some content here. Some random video. It'll take a second. Something to note about this does work a little differently than Photoshop in a sense. So Photoshop, when you add things in, when you drop a layer in, it adds that layer. All the pixels are there, and it's doing the math and thinking about that readily. What's happening on After Effects is it's referencing outside files, okay? So if, say, I save the wall as red or blue in the first video, and then I hated that, and I'm just casually dropping one thing at a time as I explain PS, sorry. Yeah, let's have that. But basically, if you're working, and so like you're working in the animation, you go, God, the red just, or the blue just isn't working. It needs to be red. If you go into Photoshop and you save that over the same file, so that whatever your JPEG was has the exact same name in the exact same folder, it will update it in the software, because it's not in the software, it's referencing. Each thing in here is referencing something in the real world, something on your computer. Let's see. If I hit reveal in Finder, it would show me where that is, what folder it's in. And at the end of this, generally when you drop any file in here, you want to put them all in a file that you're working out of, right? So you have a file on your desktop that's called class project, and all your videos that you're going to use in here that you've saved, all your images that you saved out of Photoshop and all your videos that you're going to use are saved in this one folder, and then that gets dragged into here. It's just a good way to keep them together, because if, say, you put it in the downloads folder and then you delete it out of the downloads folder, it will delete it in the software. It will show that there's no image, because it has nothing to reference back to. It's not in there, it's just referencing, which is why it's so much smaller. So if you want to send somebody an After Effects file, you have to bundle it together. And what you can do is, I'll show you later how you can do that, but you can pull everything into one folder where it goes out and it collects every single thing, and it saves a new file in a folder that then you can ship off to somebody. But if you don't send it with all the video content and all the images, the actual content, it won't work. When you render it out as a final video, it's done. There's no, it is those each frame is that individual thing. Whatever it's saved as its individual frames, that's now your new video. It is a flattened object, right? So when you save it as a movie file or a QuickTime file or whatever you want to call it, it flattens it completely, and it's now just, it's a packaged object, like the videos that I show in class, right? I can't animate it or change anything in it. It's been flattened. So when we're working in here, you drop anything that you need in this folder. I'm going to go ahead and put in some stuff from CTW that I used as well, just so we can see how. And we'll put a factory in here. We have an arrow. And we're going to look at that CTW file in much more detail next week, on Monday. But basically, we're going to look at that file in way more detail and actually look at the After Effects file. I don't want to bring it up yeah, we can bring it up. We'll bring it up in a second. It's just it's mildly overwhelming because there's a lot going on. All right, so say I want to add, this is my composition, all right? This is test. The composition's shown here, but everything is up here. I want to go ahead and make sure that I'm putting folders in down here though, because this is my test file. So everything for the test is going to go into this folder. It just makes sorting through things later easier. I'm also going to go ahead and make another folder in here, and this is just something I do. Your workflow is your own thing. This is my base files. That means anything that I'm going to be using that I'm pulling in from the outside world, whether it's content that's actors on film or me on green screen or backgrounds or anything like that, those are all my base files. They all go into that spot. All my compositions are outside, right? I'll build my composition pile here. Basically, when you get too many things in this time frame that it becomes confusing, you can batch those together into a composition. It becomes one line, and then you can double click it and go in and animate just that line later in its own time. And similar to how it updates in other things, it will update it everywhere, so that when you update something in a composition, any file that composition's in, the thing you changed will alter. When I rendered something out, I looked super pale because of the way the green screen had been pulled out of it. So I went into the original base file and I added a saturation and a contrast to make myself look a little more human. And then when I did that, it updates it in every single thing that file is used in throughout the software, because it's referencing different things, okay? So if I'm gonna go ahead and pull some base stuff in here, I like this video. All right, we're just gonna, this is what this video is, all right? So that's why it's After Effects, or After Effects is in time, right? So this is our time frame. If I zoom in, this is the mountain, big mountain zooms in, the little mountain zooms out, right? 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. If I get closer, I can go into keyframes. Here's individual seconds, right? This has no audio, so I'm not going to show audio. If I go in further, I can zoom in even more until I'm literally looking at individual keyframes. And if you hold Command and hit left or right on the arrow key, you can move one frame at a time, just literally one frame at a time. So 1 second on this software is 29 or 30 frames, basically. Mathematically, the way it works out, it's 30 frames, okay? So every time this steps, that's one frame that it's moving one way or the other. So every time the computer loads that frame, it stores it in memory. So see this little green bar at the top here? That green bar is my preloaded video. So when I hit play at the beginning, it started loading in advance so that it would be ready for me when it got there. This is as far as it has loaded, okay? If I go back to the beginning and I hit play again, everything that has a green bar will run smoothly. Everything that does not will not. Well, okay, my computer's really good, but see how it starts to slow down a little bit? This is going to be the problem you run into when you have too many things going on, okay? So just something to be aware of. If I add an arrow to this, right now the arrow is behind, it is underneath this video, and this video is taking up the full screen. If I move this arrow above, now the arrow is on top, and this is just a mouse arrow, like a mouse click arrow, okay? Right here. You can tell it's from a Photoshop file that I've saved because the frame is the entire width, which means that's where I saved it in the Photoshop file when I saved it as a PNG. I'm going to Command Z to get myself back to where it's at, home bases. When working with this though, what I always like to do is center up my control though, okay? So this little dot here is your axis of control. If you rotate, it'll rotate around that point. If you move, it'll move around that point. It's what's referred to as the anchor point, okay? When I hit this drop down arrow, it'll give me all the transform properties, which is kind of that main area where we're gonna live and do a lot of our work. Majority of the things you do are gonna be in this sector, okay? And then you add layers and effects on top of that. The anchor point is the location of this in respect to that actual image, right? So if I pivot, This is rotation. If I grab here and I move it to the right, it'll rotate. Notice how it rotates around that central point, right? I'm going to Command Z to get myself back to 0. If I move that anchor point, and I'm going to hold Shift and hit down to drop my number so that it just goes down 10 pixels at a time, notice how it moves, right? I'm moving it on the x-axis. The first numbers are our x-axis. The number 920 is exactly how many pixels it is from the edge. The center, the anchor point is 920 pixels currently from the left side, okay? That's what each individual, if I zoomed in all the way, we'd see every single dot. We can do that, why not? If I zoom in all the way, we can see every single dot. Each dot is a pixel, right? And so it thinks in regards to pixels. So, oh, this is annoying. If you go right here, the 200%, this is fit up to 200. It will fit it. It'll fit whatever your screen is to the size you have. If you have more space or less space, it'll fit it in. It's beautiful, wonderful thing. So I'm going to keep changing the anchor point until it lines up perfectly center with the arrow, because when I manipulate the arrow, I want it to feel like it's on center, right? Like when I think about moving the arrow, I'm not thinking about how I'm moving it an inch or two off from where it's located. I'm thinking about, if I have it rotate, I want it to rotate around that center point unless I tell it otherwise. And you can use that to your advantage. If you have like a door opening, that's just a flat file that if you move the anchor point to this side and then you rotate, it rotates on that point. If the anchor point's in the middle, it'll pivot on the middle and it won't stay attached to the door. Anyway, we'll look at that in a minute. But so anchor points here are changing the location. That's pretty good. The position is where it is. Again, 960 is the center because we are on a 1280. Yeah, because it's the 1280, and the 540 is center because it's the 1080, right? So basically it puts it in the middle. It lines it up with center. Now I'm not technically centered because my anchor point's off. If I click the align button over here, I go into align and I click onto this layer. I make sure that layer is actually selected. I click onto the align, I can center it. It will center the actual file. It doesn't center where my anchor point is. So note that when you're working, if you change the anchor point, it may not work as well. So this kind of affects your workflow and however you want to work. If you want to work in a way where you are saving in Photoshop, you're pulling everything to the center and then saving it so that anchor point's already there and you know where it is, you're not getting your alignment exactly and you have to figure out your alignment later. If you do it the other way around, it changes, right? There's a benefit and a negative to each way. So our position, again, we can just come in, we can just grab this number and pull it one way or the other and it moves. So that's our x-axis. Our y-axis is here. Okay. You can also just type 100. I could type 102 and it will just move 2 pixels. This is it moving 1 pixel. Okay. Again, precision is important when you're working and you'll find that later, but basically you can also come in and grab that layer and move it around. Now do be aware that it does have content awareness to the sense that because this thing has its entire frame, anywhere I grab on it, it will work. If I grab the back layer, not where that frame is, I can move the back layer. It will automatically jump to whatever layer it thinks I'm trying to grab. Okay. So be aware of that, because some layers you have that entire negative space at alpha space. And if you come over to effects and you drag and drop trying to get it on the arrow or you're trying to get it on the background, the arrow will take that effect instead. So normally when I do effects, I try to add them up here, right? Because if you add them up here, you know you're adding them exactly where they're supposed to be. Okay, scale is over here. It comes in at its natural scale, which is 100%. I can do the same thing and make it bigger or smaller, either way. The shadow that you're seeing move with it is something that I saved in After Effects to give it a little bit of depth in the real world, in the computer real worldy, right? So this little glow that's moving with it. Excuse me. I'm gonna click and set that back to 100. The rotation is the same thing. If you, this is how many rotations? This is out of 360 degrees of where you're putting it either way. So if I just do one, it will just do a full rotation and nothing will actually change. That will come into more effect when we're changing time, okay? So time and the animations, the keyframes are found when you have a stopwatch. So anytime you have a stopwatch, you can affect and change the things in time. So basically, if I wanted my mouse to start off screen, I would take it and move it off screen. Then I come over here and I click position, and now it's marked that position at this time. Every time I am at this moment in the video, it will be there. If I move over here, it will stay there because it doesn't have another place to go. Now, if I hold shift and I hit my arrow key to start moving it onto screen, notice that a keyframe appears here. That's the keyframe I'm going to be working on. I'm editing as I go. Also note that keyframe appears over here. That's telling me that I have a keyframe there. If I want to get rid of that keyframe, I can turn it off by just clicking that. If I click that, it gets rid of the keyframe, which then sends us back to where it was before I started making that edit. If I just click that keyframe button while I'm in a spot, it will make that the keyframe spot, right? So wherever it is, it will make that the spot. I've now lost the position of my old placement. If I hit Command Z twice, I can bring it back to where I was, okay? Being in this position, I can now come in and start editing and still moving it around, right? So if I want to move the mouse right to the center of the triangle, right? Now, when I come over here and I hit play, it moves it from left to right. It's going to do it over 46, 48, 6 seconds is how long it's taking to make that move. If I take that keyframe and I move it closer, it will do it faster, because now it's only taking 3 seconds to make that move. I can move that keyframe right up next to it, and it takes no time. I can put it way on the other side, and it will casually stroll its way in, okay? So this is how keyframes affect what we're doing. Now, say I want to make it look like this video is getting clicked on, and when the video gets clicked, it turns into a different thing. Here's how I would do that, right? So I'm going to have the mouse come on from off screen. Once it gets to center, thinking only in this time frame, once it gets to center, I'm going to pause it. Now, if I want to jump and do this quickly, I can use these arrows here. And if there is a keyframe in the direction that you're pointing, it will allow you to jump from keyframe to keyframe so that you're dead on aligned. Now, I want to make it look like I click. So I'm going to have scale. I'm going to hit the time frame, the time button. So now it adds a keyframe here of whatever scale it was in. That is now its point whenever it's there. Since there is no other point for it to change to, it doesn't have any difference. I'm going to move it holding Command and hitting the right arrow. I'm going to move it like 6 or 7 keyframes just to see what it does. And then I'm going to change that scale to a little smaller. Okay, so now it's, let's go down to 85, and I'm going to hit enter, and that will select that. So again, by clicking on the number and just moving the arrow keys up and down, I can move it one at a time. If I hold shift, it'll do 10 at a time. I can also just grab it and move it one way or the other. I can also click on it and just type 85, and I'm there. There's many ways you can get to where you're going, all right? Then what I want it to do is I want it to get bigger, right? Because if it's a click, it's going to come back to its normal size. So I'm going to go a little bit further than before, and I'm going to make this 100. So what happens is, in time, that's the slowest moving mouse in the world, so we're going to do this. In time, it comes on. Now that, not as real as I'd like it to be. So I'm going to zoom in to finesse. So I want it to feel like an actual mouse moving. So what does that mean? So yeah, we can get a little closer than that. Notice how I have all these frames selected. If I hold Alt down or Option, and then hit the arrow key, I can move the keyframes 1 frame at a time. If I just select 1 keyframe and I hit Alt, I can move that keyframe individually, okay? So if I select all of them, I can move them all over, so it's not affecting my click, but it is bringing everything to the spot that my movement is now faster. So now there's my faster movement, and that click is way too slow. So I want to get the click to look better. So I'm going to move this closer, and I'm going to move this closer. That was better. It still doesn't look like an actual click on a computer, though. We want realistic feeling. Okay, that's a little better, but I still think we can go a little closer. The retreat was a little slow, a little fast. There you go. Natural feeling, right? So what happens, what I want it to do is I want it to feel like it changes the background. So when I get to the point where it's clicked down, I'm going to select this layer, which is that video we've been watching. I'm going to hold Shift, Command, and D, and it splits the layer into 2. Shift, Command, D. If I right click, you can see a bunch of those options that allow you to affect things that are going on with it. It's in there. Also in Edit, split layer, Shift, Command, D, or duplicate, Command, D. You'll get used to those shortcuts as you go, and I'll call them out, the ones that you can use the most. But splitting it in 2, I can now, it automatically selects the right side. I hit delete, and it gets rid of it. So what this looks like is, it turned off the layer. So instead, I'm going to have it do another thing. I want it to turn to fire. So I'm going to put the fire behind it. Now, the fire is not the video itself. This is how it is. This is the size the video is. It's 640 by 360. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I'm going to change the size, the scale, to make it fit the screen. Now that looks terrible, right? But if I play it in time, it's harder to notice that it's an issue, right? The other thing that I like to do is drop the opacity on it. If you drop it down to 70%, it will hide some of the defects because it's been changed size, or you can find a video that's better, or make your own video safely, make some fire, find some fire, and then do that, right? So again, this is how it works when you are trying to edit things. Because this layer is playing behind, but the problem is because this layer is covering it, you can't see it. So you can line it up perfectly if you want to have that feeling. But if you don't, if you miss that spot, you'll have a dead space. You'll have a blank spot in between, right? Or maybe you want that because you want it to feel like it's loading. I don't know. Cool. Questions about any of that so far? Does that make sense? Is that making sense? So if I want this mouse to move again, I want to go off screen, but I want it to stay still for a little bit. If I just move it off screen, what's going to happen is it's going to start movement between these two keyframes. Okay. So if I come in, you'll see now, once I click, it starts moving. How do I prevent that? Well, come over to that keyframe, get rid of that, and then hit the keyframe button. So you're making a keyframe. And then if you come over here and you make its movement, now it identifies that from this point to this point, those are the same keyframe location, right? So those are the same location. So basically, it will treat it like it's standing still that whole time it's in that middle, and then it will move off in that last moment. Well, that was too fast, so maybe we'll slow it down a bit. So we'll come on, click, and then move away. Well, let's go a little faster. That delay feels terrible. So again, I'm not clicking and changing something. I'm just trying to make it look like it. I can also play with rotation. So if we want to see this thing, you know, as soon as it clicks, it does a magical rotation where it goes from its normal position to 3 flips. Whee! Spread that out. Right? It's however you want it to be perceived, and how you use the things that are floating around to affect and make it look real. Opacity has the same thing where you can come in and you play with its opacity. So I can make it feel like it's fading up as it comes on. So anytime you have a fade up, you're just playing with that. If you come over, this is now a longer fade up. This is totally nonsensical, but it does the trick. This is a more realistic thing for something that would be, it's not even in sight before it fades on. Cool. Is this starting to make sense how these things are formatted and laid out? Now, say I add another layer, and this is going to be the factory, which is going to be the thing that starts getting edited when it's when we click. It will. I don't know what it's going to do. It's just going to sit here for now. So many things going on, but I want that factory to appear when we click. So I'm going to go ahead and take these 3 layers here. I'm going to select them all together, and I'm going to right click them, and I'm going to click pre-compose. This folder is getting way too busy. If I click pre-compose, it'll ask for a name. I'm going to say click. Okay. So basically click is now this composition. Where did it go? Did I cancel that? Pre-compose, give me a second, sorry. Okay, typing's real hard. Just compose, yep. Cool. So basically now we're looking at this composition, and notice how it's appeared up here. It is now its own composition layer, and it's the same thing that we had. It is the starting video, and then whenever the mouse was supposed to come on and click, it will do its thing and turn into fire, okay? But if I go back to test, it now just appears as one line, okay? So now it does all of the things it was doing, but I have less going on. Now I can come in and just edit my factory and not worry about everything that was supposed to happen. So that was going on with the other layers. I can simplify this. So I'm now going to grab this. I'm going to move it to center. I'm going to move its anchor over to its center, which means moving it. And then I'm going to center this over. And I'm going to make this really big, like super big, so that it takes up the whole thing. Yeah, that's fine. And I'm going to make this opacity 0, and I'm going to click opacity, and I'm going to click scale, and then I'm going to come in and I'm going to change it here to 100. So it is normal size. We don't see it because it's invisible because its opacity is 0. So I make the opacity 100. We got start keyframes. So now what I want to do is I'm going to come over and find where it clicks. One keyframe at a time, I find the click position, and I'm going to make this fly in. So now when it clicks, not only does it change it to fire, but it brings in, right? The sky is the limit of the nonsense you can do. And whether you're layering video or layering images or layering whatever you have, you can change and manipulate exactly how it functions. The other thing that I want to talk about is masks, and masks are hiding things from an image, and you can manipulate those too. So say I want to get rid of this thing right here, or I want to get rid of this entire building here. I just want this smaller building. If I am selected on this layer, so that this layer is selected, right? That's the right one. So then I'm going to come up to the pen tool, and if I click, I'll start making points, and this will automatically make a mask for me. I can click some random ones because it doesn't matter. These ones, it matters, and it will automatically delete anything that it doesn't include in the selected video, anything that I don't want included, right? So that's a mask. Now, say I want it to look like it appears over time, I can also change the mask's path and its shape, right? And now I have a little drop down here where I can move this over. And then when I change it, I click on just that mask. I'm going to use Shift to unselect because it will automatically select all of my mask edges. So I'm unselecting those, or if I don't hit Shift after I've selected one, it just selects one point. And now I can move this over, and I can select this point individually and move this over. And then I can select this and move this up. And now what's happened in real time, it looks like it's appearing, right? Now that's super crisp, but I want it to be magical. I want it to be softer. So I'm going to come into the feather, and this mask, I'm going to apply 20 pixels worth of feather to the edge. That kind of messes up the beginning. So maybe I want to move this down a little bit and over a little bit to hide a little bit more. But then when it reveals, now it's a softer edge reveal, right? So that's additional ways that you can manipulate those things. But masks are a great way. You can also change it so that it inverts, right? So if I'm here and I don't want this, it'll subtract just that. So now my selection is only the thing I didn't want. So if you need to pull something out of an image, you can customize it, and you can literally go frame by frame, editing that and making sure that you see how that, so like if I was moving that thing around, or a person's moving around and I want to cut out their background, I can do it frame by frame. It will take forever, which is why green screen saves us that help. But if you think about anyone that's flying in a movie and they have a cable overhead, they basically mask out the top of it so that you don't see the cable, and they just make sure that it's framed the right way so that you only see the actor the whole time, right? That's somebody's job. Cool.